So this paper that I'm giving today, the title that I have given to it is The Role of Language Sciences in the Technological Evolutions and Revolutions. I put the R in parentheses deliberately, in the dissemination and transmission of human knowledge. The paper aims to give you a sort of critical reflection on both the opportunities and the challenges that the latest technologies offer in the production and dissemination of human knowledge in the 21st century, by making reference to some of the milestones in the history of technological development from the perspective of language sciences. So I will pinpoint a few of the pertinent examples from the history of humanity, and I will be speaking about the impact of the clay tablets to parchments, to scrolls, to incunabulum, written and later spoken press, up to the current palm-held electronic tablets, as I call them, and other wonderful devices that we have. Over 140 years ago, one man of rare genius began to reflect upon the role of language in the studies, in the role of society, especially in the history of humanity. In his closing, in the closing of his lecture of 1881-1882, this was an inaugural lecture at the University of Kharkiv. Now Ukraine at that time was part of the old Russian Empire. This linguist, Alexander Potemyak, stated that the supremacy of linguistics and mathematics in the primary and intermediate education is based on their fundamental character in relation to the other sciences. These are sound, and because they are the most expedient, because they serve as a unique access to human knowledge of the life and nature. And indeed, these are the boundaries of the preeminence of these sciences. So this rare thinker that I'm mentioning, of the theory and philosophy of language, he foreshadowed many of the developments of the 20th century linguistics. His theory postulated the interaction of language as a faculty, thought and cognition. Thought is always conscious thought of a cognizing being. His argument was that every speech act is at the same time an act of understanding, of consciousness, of cognition, of interpretation, and of creativity. He was writing at a time when sciences were giving great strides, and indeed the language sciences, rhetoric, grammar, logic, dialectics, and philosophy, were being replaced by a new science of language or linguistics. He often reflected on the role of sciences and also on the role of old concepts that were replaced by new ones as knowledge evolved. He often illustrated this by referring to the history of ideas of sciences other than linguistics. For example, he made reference to the knowledge of the 18th century, like phlogiston and living force, and how electricity was understood. Central to his theory and philosophy was the role of language, which is uniquely human and therefore individual and therefore subjective, which develops in a speech community, which shares the same history, the same culture. It is a society, and therefore it has some sort of local or national identity. This man was Alexander Potemyak. He was born in 1835 and he died in 1891. And he was one of the most outstanding thinkers of many, among many people. So his seminal work, which is called Proton Language in 1862, he had already paved the way to his formulating of theory and philosophy in his lecture that was already rewritten. And the quotation I gave, it had been already rewritten a number of times, and this lecture is in 1881, so he had already formulated. From the outset, he was very aware that a number of mathematical concepts could explain phenomena of language as a unique faculty. Indeed, he argued that it is language that enables man to access man's history and also to track down the evolution of human thought as encoded in language. From time immemorial, man has always strived to explain nature external to himself and internal, his own nature. So this mythical thinking contained the germs of scientific thinking. There is an explanatory necessity. He stated that we can only know man from the time that man began to use language. Oral history, tales, legends, handed down through the generations, and the written text that preserve contain those tracks or traces of the history of man and his thinking. The capacity for symbolic thinking was something that he studied very comprehensively, and he examined not only natural language as a symbolic system of thinking in his comprehensive theory of science, but also other symbolic systems such as mathematics, arts, visual and music, etc. The capacity for symbolic thinking and representation was perceptible in children acquiring language and developing along with their cognitive capacity to think symbolically, as when they use metaphors to explain, for example, that an item, a piece of wood, becomes a horse when they are playing, for example. And indeed, he stated that if one, for example, with this concept, he says, if one were to try and to convert the surfaces which form a statue from within the statue, from the depths of the statue, into mathematical formulae, it goes without saying that much would remain unanalyzed. The aggregate of such formulae, perceived in succession, would not yet give the impression of the statue. However, a series of digits, and I will say that he's saying this in 1894, a series of digits representing a melody needs to be transformed into an imaginary or real sounds in order to give a musical impression. So if we think about this quotation, we see that he's already foreshadowing the creation of what we have in media today, which are the CD-ROMs and whatever else. Yeah. And he says that math is such a science that it is prepared by language, but once it has been prepared, it then rejects natural languages and adopts symbolic language. And that is extremely important. Don't forget that many terms in mathematics were coined in 17th century and 18th century. Writing systems, hieroglyphic, pictographic, alphabetic, are indeed a development of this symbolic form of thinking. And indeed, he often said that not only mathematics was important for linguistics, but it was important for all sciences, whether they are natural or they are human or humanities. And one quotation that I should like to make is a very famous quotation that appears later on in his life, is 1884, and I quote, he says, "Our times are an example of the interaction of sciences and of choice of the middle way. Linguistics and physiology," biology says Chomsky, by the way, "linguistics and psychology, linguistics and history, psychology and physiology. Il faut cultiver notre jardin." And I mention these terms because it's the last line in Candide, Voltaire. Voltaire quotes from Candide quite literally. So what he says is that we have the access to this knowledge, of the past knowledge of humanity, through language. And the language, in this case, is encoded in many ways, whether it is the oral medium is the primary medium, and the written media are surrogates. They are substitutes of that. And indeed, he is very concerned about that. He says that for a man, real knowledge is only the knowledge of essence. And the varied marks, A, B, C, D, which are noticeable in an object, do not constitute the object itself. Whether they are taken separately, as it is obvious, for example, like the color of the hair, of the hair of a dog. It is not the dog yet if you have the color of the hair of the dog in their entirety, because this aggregate is the sum, the plurality, whereas the object is always the unity for us. Secondly, because A as an object should contain for us not only the sum of the specific marks A plus B plus C, okay, but also the possibility of the unknown, x plus y, etc. Okay? The object should somehow be distinct from its marks, and by the way, it should unify them and condition their existence. First of all, man comes to the consciousness of existence, of the dark core of the object, and then to the knowledge of the object itself, the actual object. And then, obviously, in the word, this is represented by the unity and generality of the term that he uses, which is obras, which combines two meanings: the real object of an icon, of an image, and the symbolic, the metaphoric, which is the representation, the picture, portrait. I do not want to go into that. This preamble is really to say that I draw on him, and it's particularly because I met Claudia Wanderley through a lecture that I was giving, and she was fascinated by the mathematical component of his theory, and this is dedicated specifically to her, and for the emails that we have exchanged so far. And so the tools and instruments, he says, tools and instruments were created and developed by men since time immemorial, okay? So if you think about that, this is always, has been, this idea of representing things has always been part of the human character, or the human capacity, of the human thinking, yeah? So if we look at these prehistoric cave paintings, whether they are in Europe, or they are in Australia, or Africa, or Asia, or even these remote islands in the middle of the oceans, you will find these amazing pictures, pictorial representations, which are a way of representing, yeah? Trypillian culture in Kiev, more than 3,000 years ago, drawing with lines and things like that. An aesthetic dimension, very important, is always present in these amazing creations, which indeed have stood the test of time. They have been handed out to our time. And we can marvel at them, because obviously we always think, my goodness, how could these people have done all of this? And if you think about that, if you want to narrate something, explain something, the events of the phenomena, and this has always been something that arose the curiosity of people. So if you had a big thunder and that coincided with a good crop, that was positive. If you had a big thunder, it hit a tree and killed a man, it was negative, and then this was created. But the idea is that you want to explain that. This is a phenomenon that you want to explain. So man has always seemed to want to narrate about his, environment, about himself, explain the things, yeah. And if we look, to distant times and see how the knowledge was circulated, and what we are doing today with our tablets, electronic tablets, our blackcurrants, we are basically circulating knowledge, disseminating it. So basically what you have is this human activity recorded in various ways, with various technologies. It is not anything new. If you look at the old clay tablets, which you can find in any of the big museums, you will see that the technology of tablets was a very single, very effective, portable type of text that you could carry around with you with loads of information, knowledge that you may have required later on. And so we have men using barks of trees, papyrus, leaves of plants, skins of animals to record his writing. Scrolls later gave way to books. And this continued to fascinate us, okay? We are always reminded of the capacity to peep into this universe of our fellow humans in the distant past. A lot of excited anticipation has been going on because there is an exhibition that had just opened in New York on the 13th at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And this is an exhibition of scrolls. They are Egyptian medical scrolls. And according to the New York Academy of Medicine, these texts have something absolutely unique. They demonstrate not only the fact that the things that we already know, that the Egyptians were wonderful engineers, we know the pyramids, we know Luxor, etc. We have the stone statues and all the hieroglyphs and everything. But apart from that, they have left a legacy of the first first elements of science. This is history of science and history of medicine. And in this text that can be seen in New York, and if you want to see it, you can, you have descriptions. It is, by the way, 4,000 years old. And it has descriptions of basic surgery, brain surgery, treatment of brain surgery, And you have treatment which uses what would be the precursor of penicillin. And you have a number of other things. If you're interested, you can have a look. I'm just mentioning this because this is absolutely fascinating. These scrolls were translated in 1920, and they were held by the New York Academy of Medicine. And this is pretty emblematic of what I have been saying. Every time that a tablet, a scroll, or another type of artifact is found by archaeologists somewhere, there is always a degree of excitement. And we can, because obviously we can look back at the history of humanity and try to understand what man was thinking in the past. I'll give you some of the tablets and the texts that have always fascinated me. I'll just give you some examples. For example, the terracottas of the cybersyllabic sort of inscriptions of 410 BC, which are absolutely marvelous. So you look at them and they are, you know, and what they were thinking there. And this is Iron Age in Cyprus. What about the Epic of Gilgamesh of the 7th century BC? It's a flood tablet that was found in Nineveh, where you have the famous cuneiform tablet of Mesopotamia, and the Babylonian map of the world, which was made in 700 to 500 BC in cuneiform fonts, showing how the Mesopotamians saw the world. So you have this fascination. I have a fascination with maps. I don't know about you, but I do. Because we are always mapping things in our life, aren't we? So a clay tablet carrying a letter from Buriada to Menantupad of the Kassite dynasty of 1359, between 1359 and 1333 in BC, gives an account of the diplomatic relations between Mesopotamia and Egypt. Most fascinating to learn about, you know, diplomatic relations at that time. And what about that tiny green jasper seal stone, you know, very tiny one, with signs in Minoan hieroglyphic symbols? And some old Babylonian cuneiform tablet that tells us about omens, spells, things that you should know, you know, that can happen to you, and especially the tradition of the sheep's stomach omen. It's very fascinating. That gives you an insight, you know, how, you know, people dealt with belief, with religion as well. The pictographic myth have been allocated, for example, the beer that was allocated 3,100 years before Christ. Beer apparently was a very popular drink in Mesopotamia. It was the most popular one. Not only today in many countries, including the one I have adopted in Britain, yeah? We like that. And in Britain, we have a fascinating collection of tablets, which are of Roman Britain. So they are tablets, and they are waxed, and they used pointed instruments to send letters, to send invitations. So we have invitation for a birthday party, for example. You have a fascinating tablet. This is all Roman Britain. A birthday party that where Sodicia Lepidina is inviting the commander's wife to the birthday party in Northumberland. Okay, so this surviving technology still amaze us. I don't know if they do you, but they do amaze me. The Chinese early books that were made of little bits of bamboo that were stitched together here and there, and you would turn the bamboo bit, you know, by bit. They flattened the bamboo first, and then they made the pages. They are absolutely marvelous, yeah. So if this technology of scrolls, tablets, books from bamboo that represented great advances technologically were used as tools, is a common characteristic of this use of a symbolic system of representation of specific knowledge in one of the writing systems. This, of course, requires a significant understanding of language, of its grammar, so that it could be codified in a pictographic or hieroglyphic writing system, and later into an alphabetic system. Imagine that people had to have either an empiric knowledge or a real knowledge of these things to be able to do that. We have lost the awareness of the economy, the memory that these things represented. The evolution of technical scientific thought happened in various places and in various parts of the world. There was a significant migration of know-how with the expanding empires and the kingdoms. And the early handwritten books cost a real fortune. And then the first libraries were created. We just had a brilliant lecture by Mr. John about libraries and books. And the Alexandrian library, of course, lives within these traditions. Libraries and archives enabled men to store and hand-on knowledge, hand-over knowledge in a manner that could always be retrieved. Libraries began to contain the knowledge of the universes, true encyclopedias. Encyclopedias and dictionaries were tools that followed. And what is the internet today? Is it not the largest encyclopedia that we have? Probably you could say that it is one of the largest encyclopedias that we have, because we have all the, or possibly all the knowledge that existed in the past and the one that is being created, and with a great capacity for the one that will be created in the future. So as a basis of this means of recording and storing knowledge was also the knowledge of language as a faculty and the use of language. The Christian world, both in the Eastern and Christian and Western worlds, made big advances because they needed to explain the Word of God, the Word of the Lord, through the Bibles. And because very often, with the people had forgotten the Greek, they didn't know very much, they had the Latin tradition, and then suddenly a translation from Arabic appeared of the Bible and of Aristotle, whatever, and this was brought back into Europe, and this translation that came from the Arabic then inspired new translations of Bibles and psalters and prayer books, and all of this did also came along with the need to create vernacular grammar. So 1500s see this huge evolution. But along with that, we also have this huge revolution in the Copernican revolution in science, and the technology, like Gutenberg, which obviously made this huge leap, where the books that were handwritten manuscripts suddenly became available to many more people because they were printed, because there was a possibility of printing. So Gutenberg for the whole world, William Caxton in England, have indeed produced the first incunabula, which are absolutely wonderful. If you sit and look at them, and I always have a great, pleasure to look at those things, because obviously they've taken so much love and dedication and so much creation, not only in form but also in content, which is extremely interesting. So there is a huge amount of Bibles, the concordancing of Bible text. This is the first discourse analysis, where they look at various versions of the Bible, and until, for example, in England, James' Bible is authorized, is the authorized version of the Bible. You have various versions, and then people who study, the scholars, the theologians, have to look at these Bibles and concordance, combine the different bits of text, and they annotate it, and some of the books are that thick, they are huge like this, and you can enjoy yourself reading that quite a lot if you really like it. And there are a number of very interesting elements with that. For example, the missionaries went out to the world, the Portuguese missionaries, and Brazil has a heritage of that. Padre Anchieta is absolutely essential in that, in our history, in the Brazilian history of grammatical thought and grammars and all of this. In England, Francis Bacon writes Novum Organum, where he discusses the ciphers, the idea of symbolic thinking, of emptying the language of the idols of the marketplace. That's what he says. Because we need a new science. Novum Organum, of course, is referring to Aristotle, because he doesn't reject Aristotle. And then we have the Cartesian revolution, then we have the encyclopedists, and then we have the amount of knowledge that we are more familiar with. And there is another part of the history. I mentioned Podemia as well, because in the 20s, before that I would like to say, there is photography that comes, which is the storage of images, and then combined in films, that becomes very interesting. You have the telegraph, you have the radio and the TV. And the World War II, you have the decoding of the secret messages that are being sent from one place to another, and it helps the effort of war, and of course, the war is won, and that is very interesting. But the Cold War in the USSR starts. And this tradition that I referred to, which is a 19th century tradition in mathematical thinking, is reinstated by the various researches that are being carried out in cybernetics. And I'll tell you a story that you may not know, but if you do, I do apologize. Cybernetics is a Greek word that means to govern. It is the science of systems control, by means of which transfer among elements of a given system can be made. It was Wiener's cybernetics, or the control and communication in the animal and machine, in 1948, that introduced these sort of terms. And then this technical cybernetics began to appear, systems of technical devices and automatons to control. And they were used for biological and medical studies, okay, of the laws of communication in man and plant, in organisms, especially in humans, in the social technical concentrates of human organizations. So by 1940s, after being regarded bourgeois, applied to economic planning, the Academy of Science in Kiev, in Ukraine, has a center for theoretical cybernetics. By 1947, the earliest research laboratory of modeling and computer technology is headed by Lebedev, and then of the then Institute of Physics. He works with memory elements in computers, and this section is headed by Kerecuk. And in 1957, the Center Research creates another computer center at the Academy, and that is led by a gentleman called Lushkov. In 1962, the Institute of Cybernetics is functioning, and in 1945, by that time, Gadgetko began to do electronic modeling of computing at the University of Kiev and another computing center. Between the period of 48 and 51, the research group under Lebedev created the first electronic computer, which is called MEON in the USSR, because that was the war, battle on. Lushkov made a contribution to the theory of digital automatons, the theory of self-organizing systems. That's how it was defined. And other areas of theory applied to research. Hnidenko, Kaluzhin, Korolyuk, Yushchenko invented algorithm language for calculations, special algorithm language, which is called ALGEC, based on the international language ALGOL 60, headed by Lushkov, Hladun, who did mathematical linguistics. And this was happening in Kiev, in Lviv, which is western Ukraine, and Russians and Polish people always pronounced Lviv as Lvov, that's the same city, Lviv is in Ukrainian. Dnipropetrovsk worked, and they also worked on teaching machines, which was very interesting. The Institute of Cybernetics then publishes the first encyclopedia of cybernetics in Ukrainian. You know that the language policy of the former Soviet Union was to have Russian as the international universal language. So obviously Ukrainian was not the universal language that was promoted. Nonetheless, this encyclopedia is published, and then later on it is translated into Russian and then circulated. But something else happens. When politics is involved in things, sometimes science can be stopped, in the tracks. While they were preparing these computers, they were working digitally. They were not working with analog computers, which is very interesting. And they were beginning to advance so much that the Minister of Defense in Moscow began to become very worried indeed. They thought they could have access to the databases of the, MOD, the Ministry of Defense, in Moscow, and immediately they cut all the resources of the Institute of Cybernetics. So they killed it, by not funding it. And of course, in a planned economy where everything is controlled, and where you can only, of course, have money if the state gives you the money, and there is no other choice, so obviously that was killed. But there is a very rich heritage, and if you want more details about that, I will certainly mention that to you. But I can mention more of that to you. So there are really interesting discoveries that promote, scholarship at certain times in history, and we see that there are stops and starts in many ways of that. But what we see in all of this is that language is basically the essential, the crucial sort of tool, and absolutely essential in the development of any of these technologies, whether it is the computer that was created in the West or the computer that was created in the East, or whether it is the preparation of the artificial languages that are so important for all the computers, the fourth generation, fifth generation of computers nowadays. Language is absolutely essential, natural language, that's what I mean. And within these discussions that I have had, you know, I was just in the library. I had the opportunity to go to a library in New Jersey, in a city which is called South Brook. And there is an amazing library there, and there is a room that is complete, that is locked usually to the public. I had the special privilege that they opened this library for me. And in this library I saw a collection of Bibles that were coming from 1500s. I saw books, prayer books. I saw musical scores in square notation. And while I was looking, because obviously I was looking, I found a grammar, a 1665 grammar of Latin, Hebrew, and Arabic, and which was a multilingual. Nothing changes in this world. And then I found, then suddenly I came across some folios, medieval folios, with illumination, with calligraphy. And I stopped and I said, my God, you know, I'm going to be speaking in Paris, you know, and I must mention that, how much, you know, how beautiful this text is, and how interesting it is that many of these new devices or tablets, as I call them, new modern tablets, like the Blackberries or laptops or all the others, also have an aesthetic, a visual element. So obviously the aesthetic component of the human knowledge, the perception of beauty, I would suggest, is one of the sort of key human characteristics that has been handed down over centuries. Of course it's modified, of course our images now are on the internet, but they are different. There are some very important ethical issues, though, that we have to consider. When I spoke about the Institute of Cybernetics in Ukraine, I mentioned the fact that it was a control system. It really comes from the word control in Greek. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to control their economy. That was a command economy. And I suspect that most of the computer systems and many other things are exactly a desire or a wish to exert control, or to sustain control, or perhaps to keep control to yourself. Only that. How many of us have known people that have learned about things and knew about things, but they would never tell anybody because just in case, you know. But there is also the other ethical elements. With this very fast evolution of technology, and I call it, that's why I call my paper Evolution, and in parentheses revolution, because sometimes if you think over a long period of time, you will see that it is an evolution really, that it is a step-by-step, a gradual sort of evolution. I believe that with this current era, where we have the possibility of some places to be completely equipped with computers, every child has a computer at school. Children in England use computers when they are 5 years old, when they go to school. And there are other places in the world, in Africa, in Asia, in Brazil, where people have not even a TV, you know, let alone a computer or a system, a satellite system or whatever, that would allow them to use this technology. And so we have the very difficult question of the digital divide, that it must be in the heads of all the policy makers and the people who advise governments, because that is extremely important. And also, there is the other issue that has become quite a topic for conversation, and I just attended the 10th International Conference on the History of Ideas in Language Sciences, and one of the sessions was dedicated to the possibility of whether one would make available the knowledge that you produce as free access, whether free access should be given or should not be given. And I think that this is the type of place that this is the best discussion can be done. And I have finished. Thank you very much for the patience, and thank you very much for listening to me in English. And I'm studying French very hard, and I hope that in the future meetings I will be speaking French. Thank you.